Ben Carter had never been the kind of CEO who ran his company from behind closed doors. A decade earlier, he had launched GrillNation from a borrowed food truck and a cooler of ingredients picked up on credit. He had grilled sandwiches by hand, taken orders in the rain, and cleaned up after long days himself. It was that grit that helped him grow GrillNation into a 6-location regional success. But now, sitting in his office on the 11th floor of a sleek downtown building, something felt off. He was hearing things more than usual. Complaints from customers, low morale, and most concerning of all, whispers about how one location, Brookfield, had become the worst place to work. The final straw came in the form of a customer survey that mentioned a young woman crying near the soda fountain, overheard by guests who weren't sure whether to alert staff or just walk out. That image stuck with Ben. When he asked his district manager about it, the response was quick and dismissive. Kids these days don't know how to work, but Ben knew better. He hadn't built GrillNation on shortcuts or assumptions, and he didn't accept vague excuses. He needed to see it for himself, not through numbers or sanitized reports, but with his own eyes. So he made a plan. He shaved his beard, dyed his graying hair a shade darker, and even applied a small fake mole on his cheek. He used a different name, Rick, and was entered into the system as a new trainee through a temp staffing program. Since the company often cycled through new hires this way, no one at the Brookfield location had ever seen him in person. The disguise wasn't about theater, it was about humility. Ben knew that the people closest to the ground level often told the most truth, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. When he arrived at the Brookfield store on a Thursday morning, it didn't take long for him to feel the difference. The air was heavy and stale, thick with heat radiating from the grill in the back. No music played through the speakers. Conversations were hushed, and glances between team members seemed loaded with unease. He noticed employees moving cautiously, as though every task could provoke tension or conflict. It was a stark contrast to the vibrant energy that had defined GrillNation. In its early days, Ben introduced himself as Rick to the store manager, a man named Greg who looked him up and down without much interest. "You'll be shadowing one of our team members today," Greg had said, handing Ben an apron. The tone wasn't welcoming. It was transactional. That was his first clue that the issues ran deeper than miscommunication or staffing gaps. This wasn't just a store that was short-handed, it was one that had lost its heart. As Ben stepped behind the counter and into the prep area, he began taking mental notes, not just of policies ignored or corners cut, but of something more alarming, the absence of dignity. Workers seemed defeated before their shifts even started. There were no smiles, no camaraderie, no spark of pride. It didn't feel like GrillNation. And in that moment, Ben Carter, the founder and face of the company, realized something painful but necessary. Somewhere along the way, the business had grown, but its soul had been left behind. Ben was barely 5 minutes into his first shift at the Brookfield store when Greg, the manager, pointed toward the prep station. "You'll be shadowing Emily," he said. Already turning away, "She's fast. Try to keep up." There was no formal welcome, no quick tour, not even a rundown of basic expectations. Just a curt handoff to a young woman who looked like she was already deep into her shift. Emily, no older than 25, was slicing tomatoes at a pace that almost blurred her hands. Her uniform was soaked through at the collar and underarms, her ponytail tucked under a faded GrillNation cap, and her shoulders hunched like they'd been carrying weight far heavier than trays and sandwich bins. Ben stepped beside her and introduced himself as Rick. She glanced at him with a polite but tired nod and kept working prep trays to your left. She muttered, "We're too short today." Her voice was flat mechanical, but her actions were anything but careless. She double-checked expiration dates, wiped surfaces after each prep cycle, and corrected small mistakes without being asked. Ben had been around kitchens long enough to recognize real competency, and this young woman had it. What she didn't have was energy. Her eyes were rimmed with fatigue, her breathing slightly labored as if she hadn't slept in days. He asked gently if she was doing okay. She paused just for a second and said, "I haven't had a real break in 3 days." It's always like this. I just need to get through the semester." As the lunch crowd began to build, Ben watched Emily shift from prep to register to grill without hesitation. She greeted customers, made sandwiches, restocked napkins, wiped spills, and answered questions from a newer worker, sometimes all within the same minute. Her pace wasn't frantic. It was refined. It was the kind of multitasking that came from habit, not adrenaline, but it was also the kind of performance that masked how close she was to the edge. Several times Ben noticed her hands shake slightly when she paused to rest them. She would blink hard as if forcing herself to stay focused. She didn't complain. She didn't stall, but the signs were there. Midway through the shift, as the rush peaked, two other workers called out sick. Greg didn't offer help. Instead, he walked past the front line with his phone in hand, stopping only to bark out corrections or roll his eyes at slower employees. Ben tried to assist where he could, restocking condiments and wiping tables, but it was clear the operation ran on one thing: Emily. She didn't ask for help. She didn't have the time to. Every time something went wrong, a spilled drink, a wrong order, a delay, she fixed it. Not because she was told to, but because no one else would. Around 2 p.m., Ben noticed Emily slow for the first time. She leaned against the prep table for a moment, her breathing shallow, hands trembling. "Sit down," Ben said quietly, stepping toward her. "You need a break." She barely shook her head. "Greg will lose it," she whispered. "I'm fine." But her eyes said otherwise. Without another word, Ben ducked into the back fridge and grabbed a cold water bottle. He handed it to her, and she looked at him like he'd just handed her a winning lottery ticket. "Thank you," she breathed, clutching the bottle like it was a lifeline. And that's when Greg walked out from the back. He didn't notice her at first. He was laughing, phone in hand, talking to another staff member. "You should have seen her," he said loudly. "Practically crawling earlier. I almost asked if she needed a walker." Emily froze. Ben saw the pain flash across her face, like someone had slapped her. Greg looked up and spotted her still holding the water. "Oh," he said, smirking. "Didn't see you there. Speedster breaks over. Let's hustle." Emily didn't argue. She simply put the water down and walked back to the grill, her shoulders sagging. Ben stood still for a few seconds, jaw clenched, his heart pounding. Not from the heat, but from the rage. He had seen enough to know this wasn't a one-time slip. It was a system failing quietly, and people like Emily were the ones paying the price. Ben had seen burnout before. He had felt it himself in the early days of running GrillNation from a folding table in a borrowed parking space. But what he witnessed in Emily that afternoon wasn't just fatigue. It was depletion. She leaned against the prep counter as though her legs might give out. Her face was pale, her breath shallow, and her hands barely steady enough to open the sandwich wrap. Her cap had slipped back slightly, revealing damp strands of hair stuck to her forehead. This wasn't a temporary exhaustion. This was a young woman running on fumes in a workplace that had made survival part of the job description. Ben glanced around. No one seemed to notice, and more importantly, no one seemed to care. He didn't ask permission. He walked straight into the back cooler, grabbed a cold bottle of water from the crate, and returned to Emily's side. "Here," he said gently, pressing the bottle into her hand. She blinked at him in disbelief, as if kindness had become so rare it felt suspicious. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. She held the bottle to her forehead. First, then unscrewed the cap and took a slow, careful sip like someone who didn't want to waste a drop. Ben stood beside her, watching her chest rise and fall, watching her try to hold it together with whatever pieces of herself were left. It hit him harder than he expected. She wasn't weak, she was enduring. Then it happened. Greg emerged from the back room laughing as he scrolled through his phone. He didn't notice Emily at first, or maybe he didn't care. He was speaking to another employee by the drink machine, his voice too loud and tone too casual for what came next. "You should have seen her earlier," he said with a chuckle. "I swear she was crawling. I almost offered her a walker." The other employee gave a half-hearted laugh. more out of politeness than agreement. Ben watched as the color drained from Emily's face. Her hand froze on the water bottle, her shoulders locked. It wasn't just embarrassment, there was something deeper: humiliation, pain. Greg finally looked up and noticed them. His grin faltered for a moment when his eyes landed on Emily. "Oh," he said, still half laughing. "Didn't see you there. Speedster. Break's over, let's hustle." His voice had that smug edge, the kind used by people who think power is performance. Emily didn't reply. She lowered the water bottle, turned without a word, and walked back to the grill. Ben stood still, his hands clenched so tight behind his back that his knuckles ached. He hadn't planned on reacting. Not yet. Not until he understood the full extent of what was broken here. But what he had just heard wasn't a mistake or a misjudged joke. It was a reflection of a culture that had let a manager become careless with people. He took a slow breath and followed Emily's path back to the grill line, helping her reset trays and restock sauces, acting like nothing had happened, at least on the surface. But in his mind, Ben was already forming the next steps. He couldn't confront Greg yet, not without giving away his identity, not without risking the integrity of what he was here to do. He needed more than anger, he needed evidence, proof, patterns, something he could use to do more than fire one man. Something that could fix the system that allowed this kind of behavior to take root in the first place. And for that, he needed to wait, to listen longer, to keep his cover just a little bit longer. As the shift wore on, Ben continued to observe closely. Quietly, he watched how Greg stayed mostly in the back, how he delegated without checking, how he flirted uncomfortably with a cashier named Samantha, who didn't seem the least bit interested. He watched how Emily took on everything no one else would touch, how no one offered her a break, and how not one manager asked her how she was holding up. It was as if her endurance was the expectation, not the exception. And as the sun began to dip behind the parking lot outside, Ben made a promise to himself this wasn't going to end with a stern talk or a formal warning. It would end with change, or it wasn't going to end at all. Ben arrived early the next morning, still in disguise, slipping into the Brookfield store before the first customer walked through the door. The lights buzzed softly overhead, and the air smelled faintly of bleach. Someone had done a surface-level clean, likely just enough to get by. He moved quietly, pretending to reorganize a tray of prep utensils while his eyes scanned the store more closely. This time, he wasn't just watching people, he was watching systems or the lack of them. He opened the walk-in fridge and immediately recoiled at the smell of something past its prime. Lettuce leaves were wilted in half-open bags, and a block of cheese, clearly expired, sat unwrapped on a tray. The temperature log hadn't been filled out in 2 days. He didn't say anything. He just took mental notes. From there, he made his way through the storage room. Boxes were stacked haphazardly with delivery invoices, crumpled and stuffed into drawers instead of properly filed. Cleaning supplies were sitting too close to food prep materials. A safety hazard, a health code violation, a metaphor for how things were being run. Sloppy, careless, rushed. It wasn't just that the store was messy. It was that the mess was normalized. No one seemed to notice. Or worse, no one seemed to think it mattered, and that to Ben was the clearest sign of all this wasn't an off day. This was the standard. Greg showed up 30 minutes late, sauntering through the employee entrance with sunglasses still on and a breakfast smoothie in hand. He gave a quick nod to the cashier, barely acknowledged the prep team, and disappeared into the back office. For the next hour, Ben didn't see him once. From time to time, he could hear music playing faintly from behind the closed office door, followed by the occasional laugh, whether at a podcast or a video. Ben couldn't tell. What he could tell was that Greg had no intention of helping his team get through the morning rush. He wasn't checking inventory. He wasn't greeting customers. He wasn't training new hires or resolving issues. He was just absent. Emily arrived right on time. She looked worse than the day before, eyes, heavier movements, slower. She didn't complain. She clocked in, tied her apron, and went straight to work. Ben helped her prep the sandwich station. At one point, the slicing machine jammed. Emily sighed, pulled it apart, and cleaned the blade herself. "This thing's been busted for months," she muttered. "Greg keeps saying it's not in the budget to fix Ben." Nodded, saying nothing. She didn't know he'd already reported the broken slicer during yesterday's check-in with corporate. He hadn't told them why not yet. He was waiting for one last confirmation. It didn't take long. Around mid-morning, Greg finally emerged from his office. He walked past Emily, who was bent over the sauce bin, wiping out sticky residue from a leaking bottle. As he passed another worker, he leaned in and said with a smirk, "She always looks like she's about to pass out. Might be time to find someone who can actually keep up." It wasn't even whispered. He said it casually, like it was a joke. Ben froze. Emily's back was to Greg, but her posture stiffened. She had heard, so had Ben. He turned slowly, locking his gaze on the manager's retreating figure. There was no guilt, no shame, just indifference. Ben stood in silence for a long moment after that. The noise of the kitchen kept moving, orders being called, machines humming, customers coming in. But inside him, something went still. He had seen enough. The bad ingredients, the poor storage, the absentee leadership, those could be fixed, but the callousness, the disregard for someone's dignity that cut deeper. It was a kind of rot that couldn't be cleaned with bleach or corrected with checklists. It needed to be pulled out at the root. As Ben washed his hands at the prep sink, he looked at his reflection in the smudged stainless steel panel above the faucet. Not one more day, he thought. Not one more hour. The decision was no longer forming. It was final. And the next time Greg saw him, he wouldn't be Rick. Saturday morning arrived with a sharp chill in the air, the kind that made the sidewalk feel colder under your shoes and the storefront windows reflect a little too clearly. Ben Carter stood outside the Brookfield GrillNation location, not in disguise this time, but in his real skin. The ball cap and fake name tag were gone, so was the hesitation. He wore a navy blazer over a dark sweater, a clean shave on his face, and a quiet kind of resolve in his posture. Customers trickled into the store behind him, unaware that the man standing just beyond the glass door wasn't there to order a sandwich. He was there to change the story. Ben waited until the lunch prep crew began arriving. He let them settle in, watched them greet each other with the same tired eyes and polite half-smiles. He stood at the entrance for a moment longer, then stepped through the door. The room didn't go silent immediately, but the energy shifted. Heads turned. Conversations paused. And when Greg looked up from his clipboard near the soda machine, his smile formed instantly, practiced automatic, but his eyes darted uncertain. "Welcome to Grill," he began. Ben raised a hand, not unkindly, but firmly. "Everyone gather up near the register." He said the tone wasn't loud, but it carried. There was confusion at first. A few workers glanced at each other, unsure if they should stop what they were doing. Greg cleared his throat, gesturing awkwardly. This is one of the workers in the back." Interrupted quietly. "I know who he is." Ben. Let the silence settle before he spoke again. "I've been working beside you for the last 2 days," he said. "You didn't know who I was. That was intentional." The air in the room thickened. No one moved. No one breathed too loud. "What I saw here," Ben continued, "wasn't what this company is supposed to stand for." Greg gave a nervous laugh. "Look, I don't know what kind of show this is." "Stop talking," Ben said sharply, eyes never leaving him. The silence deepened. I watched employees push themselves to the brink without so much as a thank you. I saw expired ingredients being served a storage room that could get us shut down and a manager who spent more time on his phone than on the floor, and I heard things. Ben paused, things said about co-workers that crossed every line we claim to value. Greg's face hardened. "If someone's been feeding you stories?" Ben stepped forward. "I heard you with my own ears. Greg, twice. Both times you were talking about someone who's been keeping this store from falling apart." Ben turned to Emily, who had just clocked in. She stood frozen near the drink machine, her apron barely tied her face. "Pale, you never asked for anything." Ben said to her, "You never complained. You just kept showing up, doing more than anyone should be asked to, and you did it while barely holding yourself together. That's not strength, that's survival. And no one should have to survive their shift. Emily didn't respond. Her arms were stiff at her sides, her lips parted slightly, but no words came. She didn't need to speak. The truth had already been said out loud for the first time in far too long. Ben turned back to Greg. "You'll hand over your keys now." Greg's mouth opened, then closed again. "You're firing me, based on what 2 days of playing dress-up." "No," Ben replied. "I'm holding you accountable for months of neglect and cruelty. I didn't need 2 days. I needed 2 hours. The rest just confirmed it." Greg didn't argue. "Not really." He pulled the lanyard off his neck, dropped it on the counter, and walked past Ben without another word. Ben turned to the rest of the team. "I know this has been a hard place to work," he said. "That's on me. I let this store drift out of sight. That changes today." After the tension of Greg's exit settled, a strange stillness hung over the Brookfield GrillNation. No one clapped. No one cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. It felt more like someone had cracked a window open in a room that had been sealed shut for too long. The air was still heavy, but at least it moved. Ben Carter stood at the register, letting the silence speak for itself before reaching behind the counter and pulling out the crew schedule. The ink had smudges on it from weeks of coffee spills and rushed edits. He held it up, looked around, and began reading names. "Samantha," he said. A woman near the condiment station looked up. She wore her hair tied in a low bun and had a tired, cautious expression. The look of someone used to keeping her head down. "You're listed as part-time," Ben said, "but I reviewed the hours. You've been averaging 35 to 38 hours a week for the last 3 weeks. She nodded slowly. He kept saying, "Full-time wasn't in the budget," she replied. "But I've been covering doubles ever since Liz quit." Ben nodded. "That ends today. You're full-time starting now with benefits," Samantha blinked. "Seriously, you've earned it 10 times over," he said. And just like that, a crack appeared in her face, something almost like relief. He moved down the list. Jared, a tall man in his early 30s with work boots and a quietly observant demeanor, raised his hand. "You used to do HVAC installs, right?" Jared nodded. "Worked with my uncle for a couple years before the company folded." "Well," Ben continued, "you're taking a paid day next week to help corporate repair the walk-in unit at our Eastgate location. We'll cover your time, your travel and meals." Jared frowned. "Wait, seriously? Me? You fixed the sandwich press yesterday with a paperclip and a shoelace," Ben said. "You're clearly wasted on the register. Let's put your skills to use." A few nearby employees chuckled. Jared looked stunned. He didn't say, "Thank you." He just nodded like he was still trying to process the shift. Then Ben looked across the floor and found Emily. She was standing near the hallway to the back storage room, one hand resting on the prep counter, her eyes scanning the floor like she wasn't sure where to land. He walked toward her and the chatter quieted again. "Come with me," he said softly. They stepped into the back hallway away from the others. "I don't know how you kept showing up here," Ben began, "but I'm glad you did. You held this place together." She shook her head. "I didn't expect any of this. I didn't do anything special. You did everything." He replied, "And you shouldn't have had to." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded envelope. "Your next 2 months of wages paid in full." He said, "You're taking time off. No debate. Rest. Finish some of your courses. And then when you're ready, there's a corporate training role waiting for you." Emily blinked fast as if she hadn't heard him right. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Because I watched you carry this store on your back while being treated like you didn't exist." Ben said, "You've got leadership in you. You just haven't been allowed to lead yet." Her lips parted, her eyes glassy, but no tears fell. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. "Then I'll try." When they stepped back into the front of the store, something had shifted. It wasn't dramatic, but posture changed. Eyes met his a little longer. People stood taller even as they busied their hands with the same trays and stations. Ben didn't need applause. He didn't want it. What he needed was trust, and the beginnings of it were finally taking root. He walked over to the suggestion box by the dish station, still dusty unopened, shoved halfway behind a crate of napkins. He ripped the top off and pulled the first card. It read, "Can we please get working fans in the prep area? It's too hot to think straight." It was dated 5 months ago. Ben raised the card for everyone to see. "We'll have portable units here by tomorrow. Permanent fix by the end of next week." No one cheered, but no one looked away. Ben Carter arrived at the Brookfield GrillNation store before sunrise on Monday. The sky was still dim, streetlights flickered over empty parking spaces, and the windows of the store reflected only darkness and a hint of his silhouette. He wasn't alone this time. 2 members of the corporate operations team followed him in both holding clipboards, laptops slung over their shoulders. They moved quietly like people stepping into sacred ground. The store wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was the beginning of something bigger. Ben unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air was still and smelled faintly of sanitizer from the late-night close. No music played, no fryers buzzed. It was the perfect time to begin again. Ben pointed toward the back. "Start with inventory. I want every unit checked. Expiration dates, temp logs, delivery schedules if it's off, flag it." The team nodded and disappeared through the kitchen doors. He didn't waste time. He rolled up his sleeves, grabbed a fresh notepad, and sat down at one of the booths facing the front windows. He had no intention of hiding behind reports anymore. This wasn't a remote review. It was a reset. At 6:45 a.m., sharp, the front door creaked open. Emily stepped in her backpack slung over one shoulder. She froze when she saw him sitting there. "You came back," she said. Her voice was cautious but steady. "I told you I would," Ben replied. They sat across from each other for a few minutes, not as employee and CEO, but as 2 people who had walked through a fire together and come out standing. Ben slid an envelope across the table. "Corporate support role," he said. "Remote flex on site when needed. Full benefits. Relocation stipend. If you ever want to move closer to HQ." Emily ran her fingers along the edge of the envelope, but didn't open it. "I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything," Ben replied. "Just know this is real." She hesitated. "If I take this, I don't want to leave the others behind." Ben smiled faintly. "You're not leaving. You're leading from a better position." She nodded slowly. "Then I want to make sure someone else steps in." Already handled. Samantha's stepping in as interim team lead. The crew began to arrive shortly after. They moved differently, this time not joyful yet but alert. Their eyes tracked the new people in the store. Their pace quickened slightly when they saw Ben at the front. At 7:15, he gathered them near the register. "Some of you are tired of being told things will change," he said. "So here's what's actually different." He paused, letting the moment settle. "We've hired a third-party HR team to interview every employee here. Privately, you'll be paid for your time. No notes will go to your manager. This is about hearing you and fixing what's been ignored." Murmurs stirred across the group, but no one interrupted. "2 of you will be chosen to serve on an employee advisory panel. This location's voice in quarterly meetings with corporate." Ben continued. "You won't be filtered. You'll speak directly to leadership. No scripts, no spin." Eyes widened, a few heads tilted in cautious curiosity. "We're also rolling out a new scheduling system. No more back-to-back doubles. No more last-minute changes without consent. Starting this week, you'll have a say in your schedule." A hand went up. It was Jared. "What about pay? A lot of us are overdue." Ben nodded. "Under review already. By the end of the month, your wages will reflect current market rates retroactively." He stepped back and let the silence sit. No one applauded. No one made a big gesture, but there was a shift, a subtle one. People weren't bracing for disappointment. They were listening, hearing, considering. In the corner, the new HR representative set up at a booth, laptop open, ready to begin the first one-on-one sessions. "They're here all day," Ben said. Use your voice. Be honest. This isn't about paperwork. It's about truth. He moved toward the back of the store as employees began returning to their stations a little straighter in posture, a little less afraid. Change had arrived, not with speeches or slogans, but with structure and follow-through. And for the first time in a long time, Brookfield wasn't just surviving. It was starting to heal. It didn't happen overnight. Ben Carter knew that culture wasn't something you could staple to a bulletin board or fix with a press release. It had to be built slowly, layer by layer, with honesty, consistency, and the willingness to listen, even when the answers were uncomfortable. So he got in his car and started visiting every GrillNation location, not to inspect, but to listen. In break rooms, back storage areas, and quiet booths, Ben sat with employees, pad in hand, but rarely writing. "What do you need that you don't have?" he asked. It became his signature question, and what surprised him most wasn't the variety of answers. It was the courage it took for people to finally say them out loud. At Brookfield, things were changing in tangible ways. Samantha, now the interim team lead, took it upon herself to fix one of the store's most overlooked problems onboarding. "We toss new hires a shirt and hope they catch on." She told Ben during a one-on-one, "They feel lost by day. 2, we lose them by week 1. Ben didn't counter. He just asked, "What would you change?" Samantha laid it out, a structured 3-day onboarding plan with checklists, peer, mentorship, and a review at the end of the first week. If they pass, they stay. If not, we don't waste their time or ours. Ben nodded. "Write it up. You have my full backing." Within 2 weeks, Samantha's format was being tested at 3 other locations. Meanwhile, Emily had quietly begun her work in corporate support. She didn't need an orientation. She already knew what was broken. Her first project, a hands-on training module for frontline leadership, focused not on policies but on empathy, efficiency, and escalation. It wasn't flashy, but it was clear, personal, and built on real stories. The pilot version ran in her home region, and the feedback was almost immediate. "Finally, someone gets it." One assistant manager wrote, "This didn't feel like training. It felt like someone giving us a map out of the fog." Emily didn't celebrate. She just moved on to her next revision, always asking what could be done. Better, never satisfied with applause. Back at Brookfield, Jared had kept his head down. He didn't say much during meetings, but Ben noticed him troubleshooting a loose fixture near the front door between orders. "You ever think about putting together a technician development path?" Ben asked casually. Jared blinked. "Like a whole program?" "Yeah, you clearly know your stuff." "What would it look like?" Jared hesitated. I guess we'd need tools, a training outline, maybe a certification step. But honestly, I just need a calendar and permission to try." He didn't ask for a raise, didn't ask for recognition, just resources. A week later, the toolkit arrived, neatly boxed, labeled, and tagged with his name. It was a message from corporate that said, "We see you." Ben didn't try to run every solution. He knew better now. He stayed out of the way, but stayed close. Weekly check-ins turned into monthly updates. Store leads were encouraged to run local advisory circles. A new internal message board was launched where employees could anonymously submit concerns or ideas. Every submission was reviewed by real people, Ben included. He responded personally to several of them, including one from a janitor who suggested a new cleaning rotation that saved time and cut supply waste. The janitor got a call from operations the next day. His idea was implemented company-wide. What began as a top-down intervention was becoming something else entirely. The momentum no longer relied on Ben's presence. It came from within. The teams weren't waiting to be told what to do. They were proposing what could be done better. And for the first time in a long time, GrillNation didn't feel like a chain of stores. It felt like a network of people moving in the same direction, held together, not by rules but by shared ownership. And in the quiet moments, as Ben walked through each location, often unannounced, he heard the difference, not in what was said, but in what wasn't. The fear was fading. The silence had lifted, and in its place was something rare in corporate culture: belief. The message arrived on a Wednesday morning, early enough that some employees read it before their first cup of coffee, late enough that night shift workers saw it as they were winding down. No subject line filled with corporate fluff. No memo from the office of the CEO. Just a simple title. From Ben inside the note was brief but unmistakable in tone. I made a decision recently to stop asking for filtered updates. From now on, every store, every employee has a direct communication channel to corporate. No approval needed. No chain of command. You'll be heard and you'll get a response. If you see something broken, say something. If you have an idea, share it. If someone mistreats you, report it. And if you think no one cares, remember this: I went undercover because I lost sight of what matters. I won't let that happen again. You deserve better, and we're going to build better together. Ben Carter didn't sign the message with a title. Just his name, no CEO, no founder, no president. It wasn't a statement of authority, it was a promise of accountability. The email traveled fast. Screenshots were texted across shifts. Crew leaders read it aloud in morning huddles. Some employees shrugged, skeptical. They'd heard promises before, but others read it twice, then a third time. Not because it was poetic, but because it didn't sound like something written in a boardroom. It sounded like something written by someone who'd been standing beside them at the prep station just last week and actually meant it. Ben didn't stop at the email. He didn't retreat to his office or delegate the rollout to the operations team. He went back on the road. No disguise this time, no alias, just a company hoodie and a blank notepad. He showed up unannounced. Eastgate, Hollow Creek, Northview, even Barrow Heights, the company's oldest store, where the floor still squeaked under the front register. And each time he asked one question: what do you need that you don't have? The answers varied. Some were logistical better. AC in the back room, a second microwave, non-slip mats for dish. Others cut deeper. A manager who listens more, time to train, new hires, respect. He didn't promise instant fixes. He didn't write checks on the spot. What he did was listen, take notes, and follow up. Sometimes that meant calling in a repair team the same day. Sometimes it meant pulling a store lead aside and asking hard questions. And sometimes it meant simply showing up again the next week, not with answers, but with presence. Because Ben had realized something vital. Leadership wasn't about always knowing what to say. It was about being willing to hear what others were afraid to voice and staying long enough to prove you meant it. The transformation didn't come in the form of sweeping changes or rebranded slogans. There were no balloons, no launch videos, no company retreats with glossy posters that read, "Reignite the culture." What came instead was something quieter, but far more lasting. Teams started meeting without being told. Floor leads began mentoring naturally. Suggestion boxes filled not with complaints but with solutions. The back hallways where workers used to whisper their frustrations now hosted open, honest conversations. For the first time, GrillNation wasn't just operating, it was connecting. It wasn't about hierarchy anymore, it was about shared ownership. By the end of the quarter, the difference could be seen in ways no spreadsheet could track, in the way new hires stayed not out of necessity, but because they felt part of something. In how store managers walked the floor with curiosity instead of control. In how employees who once clocked in with earbuds and low eyes now greeted their teams with real energy. The company wasn't fixed, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was healing. And as Ben sat quietly one evening in the back booth of the Brookfield store, the place where this all began, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt grateful, because leadership, he had learned, wasn't about being everywhere at once. It was about never being too far from where it matters most. If this story moved you, we invite you to subscribe to Deep Inside HQ, where real stories meet real impact. We're building a space where empathy drives leadership and where voices from the ground are finally heard. Every like, comment, and share helps bring these hidden truths to light and keeps this movement growing. So join the conversation, stay inspired, and be part of the change. Let's go deeper together.